So about 3 years ago, we, as the world, and also as the continent, received a visitor who has refused to leave. That visitor's name is COVID-19. And we have been trying to find our footing since. And so this discussion is very pertinent, because I think for a lot of us, this is the first time we are exhaling, because it's safe. You don't think the next person is going to give you or catch COVID from you, figuratively and literally. So the panel discussion today is Cracking the Digital Economy, Media Sustainability in a Post-COVID World.
Good evening, everybody. As has been said, my name is Barak Bukusi, and I am going to moderate this panel talking about finding sustainability post-COVID-19. So I will begin by asking my panelists, or fellow panelists, we already know their names, so just to do two more things. So tell us something interesting about yourself and what exactly it is that you do at your organizations.
Hi everyone. My name is Oliver Madenge. I'm a journalist, currently working at Nation Media Group as the multimedia editor in the broadcasting division. Basically my work is to steer the broadcasting division of Nation Media Group into the digital space, trying to put in place strategies, innovations, and what we can do, and actually put out content in the digital space to especially build a sustainable media house for the future. So basically that's what I do. I don't know if there's anything interesting about myself, only that I'm getting bolder. My hair is running out.
Thanks very much. My name is Khadija, and I don't think I'm interesting enough to share anything, but I can tell you a little bit about what I do. I am a journalist, and I love journalism, and it's because I'm concerned about the future of journalism that I've joined an organization called the International Fund for Public Interest Media. And what this is a global financing mechanism for public interest media in low and middle income countries. In my experience as a journalist, as a newsroom leader, much of our problems can be solved if we just had the money to run effective newsrooms. And that's what FPIM is there for. And I am the journalist in residence at that organization.
Good afternoon. Something interesting about me, this month I'm celebrating living half my life in Kenya and in Africa. I'm originally from Australia. I moved here in 1988. So 98. Mathematics. So I have two companies. My second company is an entertainment technology startup called Yakwetu. You're upstairs, you can talk to Brandon and Gideon up there. So basically we create our own tech for distribution and retail of African content. So at the moment we've already launched our new service, our first service, which is called My Movies Africa. You can check it out. We have over 100 titles from Africa, mainly Kenya. MyMovies.Africa, available on every device except iOS, but on macOS. And then our growth ambition is to have all African content, including games, extended reality, films, TV content, podcasts, audiobooks, all in one place under the Yakwetu brand. We already have the tech to deliver that, so looking forward to discussing that a lot more. Thank you.
Hi everyone. My name is Nepurko, and I own a small consultancy business that targets women in business interested in understanding the digital integrated communication space much better and leverage on opportunities that they'll find there. If I was to give you something interesting about me, I'd have to give you a very long list. So please find me after this and maybe we can have a one-on-one.
Okay, that's great. I will do the same. I realize that I haven't answered the question. So something interesting about myself is that today is my 31st birthday. And as you can see, I set all of you guys up just to wish me a happy birthday. Anyway, and I do share a birthday with my youngest daughter. So it's both of our birthdays today. And in terms of what I do, I work in the media and entertainment space and consulting and running a VOD platform as well. So before we get into this session, yesterday I was speaking to my good friend John Allen, and he was telling me, the last session during these media festivals is usually the hardest to conduct and the hardest to have because people have sort of lost concentration. It's a bit more difficult. So I'd like each of you guys who are in the audience to repeat after me that I will not be bored. I will learn something. And I am here with intention. Okay, great. So let's kick it off. And like we've said, we're really discussing post-COVID-19 and figuring out sustainability. So this, I'll open it up to anyone of the four of you who wants to take this question. What effect did COVID-19 have on media and sustainability in Africa? What was the effect that COVID-19 had on media and sustainability in Africa? I'd leave this to any one of you.
So I'll start because this is basically my passion. And I'll tell you that I hate the word sustainability when it's used against media. Because there is no sustainable option for media right now. I think instead a better term is resilience. I think what we have to aim for is creating resilient institutions. I think sustainability has been used in a very damaging fashion, actually, and the pursuit of sustainability for media organizations is often to the detriment, actually, of the quality of some of the work that's being done there. And the effect of the pandemic has been and continues to be huge. I think that what it did was it hastened the end of the advertising model. Yes, many organizations, legacy organizations, still continue to draw enough revenue out of advertising, enough to create some products around that. But to a great extent, I think that model is on its last legs. In South Africa, we saw the most vulnerable sector of our media landscape, community media, being absolutely decimated by the pandemic. And we saw many promising organizations, especially those publishing in vernacular languages, distributing in rural areas, all shutting down. So the most vulnerable, I think, were most affected, and as true for South Africa as it is, I think, for most of Africa. I think the other thing to consider is that it's not over, that this, we just kind of almost started breathing again last year, and then Ukraine happens, and the world's entire financial system is again in a complete mess, and that has particular permutations for Africa as well. So there's a new crisis for us to withstand, and I think that several reports being done, I think the Reuters Institute at Oxford published their trends and predictions for this year, and it looks bleak. And I think that's, unfortunately, it is the last session. We want to leave with some promise and encouragement. I'm not discouraged, but I think we have to be realistic about the scale of the issue that we're facing.
I think I can just add on to what, for me, I think what we got a lot of lessons, but in human nature, we went back to our comfort zones. In terms of, we saw the change in how people are consuming content, but as media houses, once things got back to normal, instead of a new normal, we went back to what we knew. And that is where now we are struggling to get to how can we ensure that we can sustain the industry and grow it. The impact also was on not just how people consume content, but even when they consume content and what kind of content they are consuming. We didn't have a situation, looking at the numbers, the data that we got during COVID, we didn't have a lot of interest before COVID on lifestyle content, on health content, but this grew over that period. But we went back to the default settings of what are we used, the low-hanging fruits that we used to give to the audience is what we continue to do. And so the lessons that we got, we have not utilized those lessons for the development of the industry.
I can add to that. I think sitting where I sit and also sitting as a consumer of media and new media at that, I feel like the pandemic and its effects have provided us with opportunities to explore different areas of content creation, but also just understand revenue in a different sense, so that media organizations are able to give more value and treat news items with a bit more care and dignity than has been the case in the past.
I would just add, I don't know if you're referring to the Media Council report, the latest one, the State of the Media. So we saw TV consumption in 2021 go down to 58%, and I see it's back to 80%. But I think the reason for that is that if we talk about Kenya specifically, I'm not sure about other countries, but here there's so much consumption of politics at the end of the day. And what brought the viewership back, I believe, was the elections last year. So my question to you would be, do you see that being sustained? As if you're able to share NTV's strategy, is politics still a core for you as a media house? Because while we get that it's important, it really does suppress the development of other content in this market at least.
Well, I have seen the Media Council CEO here. I'll pick a bone with him about that report. After this, I don't think that report was very accurate in nature. So, but as you rightly mentioned, the election may have pushed the consumption of TV up. And what we are seeing in terms of the content and the numbers, what the numbers are showing us in terms of the digital numbers, when we compare, even when we compare political shows on TV to other forms of content, is that politics is not the only content that people are looking for. And so for us as a Nation Media Group, we are looking at how do we get away from the known or the normal that we have been used to, and what kind of content can we create that adds value. Whenever we are talking to our consumers, we are doing so much research that whenever we are talking to our consumers, they're telling us, you give us content, but is it adding value to us? That's the question they're asking. They're asking, does it have any social currency? Or are you just doing it because it's the best or it's the easiest thing to do? Because politics is very easy. I covered politics for over 10 years as a political journalist. And politics is very easy to produce. It's content that is very easy to produce because you just need to put a microphone in front of a politician and you get your story and move on. So I think we have to ensure, and this is a challenge to also the rest of the industry, that we have to move beyond the politics and look at what else can we produce.
Okay, thanks. I have a question for you, Nepugo, and inadvertently, Hadija, based on what you said with regard to resilience. In the work that you do in the consulting space, what does sustainability mean? And have you worked with any sustainable media outlets? And with regard to Hadija and resilience, what exactly do you mean when you say media organizations need to be resilient? What is the practical sense of resilience and sustainability?
In my area of expertise and the work that I do, I treat sustainability as a term that is it's deeply personal, like it starts on an individual level. So it's something that can and should be done with the least amount of stress. And in my day-to-day work with the women I work with and their businesses, I encourage them to take paths to productivity and success that can be easily replicated and are scalable, but they're also still within their capabilities. You know, don't set targets for your business that are beyond what you can actually take part in on a daily basis. In terms of working with sustainable outlets, I am yet to come across outlets that, you know, where our values align as businesses. So I'm still on the search and the lookout for that. Yeah.
So for me, first of all, when we try to think about the future of media, we know that we need innovation. The problem that we have right now is that there is a lot of innovative practice in African newsrooms. Up and down the continent, there is a lot of innovative practice. The problem, however, is that all of that energy related to innovation is being channeled into survival. And what a resilient organization has the space to do more than just survive, so that it knows that it has its cost base covered, it has space to think about new ideas, to explore new ways of storytelling, new forms of engagement. This, for me, is what I mean by resilience. It means organizations that are well run, that are well managed, but are also responding to the needs of their audiences while having space to think about the future.
Okay. Oliver and Mike, I don't know if you specifically have a comment on that before I move to my next question.
About resilience and sustainability, if you don't mind, I have a slide. I want to share something. Kevin, if you could just put the first slide up. First slide. Thank you. So, that's the one. So I also chair an organization called Partners Against Piracy Association of Kenya. This is some research that we did in December 2021 rather. So basically, from a Kenya perspective, we lose to piracy. This is content piracy, and you'll see the different types of content there. We're losing $2 million a day, essentially. So that's a lot of money. So when we talk about resilience and sustainability, and this is mainly online content, but a lot of traditional media is now going online as well. So it's something to think about. As the reason why I want to show this slide is as the association, when we reach out to the content creators in the room and ask you to help us take some action, you're the first beneficiaries of this. If you can imagine $2 million a day going back into the industry as a cash flow or as capital in terms of what it will also attract in terms of domestic and foreign investment. So it is huge. It's something that we're working on and we're committed to. Our association is a coalition of creatives and creative companies, local and international. I'll share some more information later if you want to join that. But just quickly on the next slide, something to also think about is that's what our government's losing in taxes as well. And if we correct piracy, we can generate at least another 50,000 jobs as our evaluation. Quickly onto the next one. I can make this available later. And the next one after that. Next one after that. So piracy, people think piracy is a victimless crime. I'm sure we're all content creators here, yeah? So people assume that you as the content creators are not victims, which is, and when I say people, that's consumers. But the other challenge with loss of revenue to the industry is, next slide please, is who is behind piracy. So these are the main crime syndicates around the world. The first column is piracy. They all have that in common. So what they make out of piracy, and piracy steals your data. There's no such thing as free content. When you download that content, you can get ransomware that goes into your device. They can steal and sell your data and things like that. So it's a key revenue driver that funds all the other stuff that they do, which is contract killing and drug smuggling and child smuggling and stuff like that. Next slide. That's the last one. This is some statistics from Sweden. So they found that consumers, 600,000 consumers that were using illegal IPTV were directly responsible for child smuggling. So just to keep it in mind, the next time you or your friend wants to pirate some content, there's a lot of reasons why we shouldn't support piracy. We are working against it with the ISPs. We have a new partnership with them. We're talking to them one-on-one. We will have an MOU in place to basically begin converting what's in there in the illegal economy into the formal economy, which will benefit all of you. Thanks.
Mike, so are you basically saying that I can't use yesmovies.com anymore? Essentially?
Yep.
Yeah, so all of
Yep.
you. No more Yes Movies, F Movies.
Yep. Use My Movies Africa. Yep.
Yes.
All of them. Yep.
Let me address a question specifically to Hadija with regard to funding and small media organizations. And I ask this in context of the work that IFPM does. Do you think that you do a big enough job in helping small media houses get sustainable? And I ask this question with the benefit or privilege of sitting on the board of Africa Uncensored. We were at a board meeting 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that they were discussing was the grant money that they receive, and that yes, we do receive grant money, but we can only spend between 20 to 30% of that money on actually running the organization, which limits the ability for the organization to employ and actually do its work. So the question to you and organizations such as yourselves is, one, why is that the policy? Secondly, is there a gap there that can be fixed moving on into the future?
So first of all, we're brand new. We're a startup. So I'm not taking responsibility for that. So the International Fund for Public Interest Media is not even yet properly launched. We'll be having a proper launch in the coming weeks. And it is designed to support media in a way that makes sense to the context within which it exists. And I think that's really, really important. My own experience of the media funding world is often that it's trying to ship a model that someone in Europe has thought about and trying to make sure that the same program in Nigeria is fitted in South Africa, is fitted in Kenya, is fitted in Malawi, and that just doesn't make sense. The markets are so different, the audience needs are so different. So the International Fund is new. It's meant, first of all, to answer your question, to respond to the need for organizations to cover their core costs, because that is really important. That's where organizations are struggling. We want to ensure that we are not doing the kind of funding where we're asking people to design a program, to add a new desk. We're saying, tell us what you need to do better. What you're doing now, tell us what you need, how we can help you make it better. That is basically what we want to do. We don't want you to start off saying, okay, buzzword, right? ChatGPT is a buzzword, AI. Something, AI, new desk, plus fact-checking. And we've all been there. We've been in those situations. I've been in that situation where, well, if that's the funding that's on the table, you're going to create something to get that funding. And that's unfortunately the situation that so many of us find ourselves in. And it's demoralizing, and it's a continuous dance that you have to do. So, with the International Fund, what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure a mechanism that, first of all, is more predictable in that we're not going to be changing our strategy every year. Private philanthropy obviously has very different objectives and very different kinds of working, so they may have a different strategy working in Kenya this year, not working in Kenya the following year. We want to be a little bit more predictable as much as we can be, but also essentially to try to be rooted in the local context to ensure that we are responding to what is actually needed and not making onerous hurdles for people to jump over.
Okay. I'll take everything that you've said and I'll throw this question again to everyone on the panel, taking into consideration the piracy that Mike has talked about, talking about the resilience that you've talked about. I'd like to ask, what are possible successful business models? And to take into consideration the consumer behavior that has changed post-COVID-19, right? What are potential successful business models? Or what are things that media organizations or media entities need to be taking into consideration to figure out sustainable business models?
If I may go first, I think one of the things that probably just to add on to, I think I love the idea of let's not stop copying a lot. I think that's one of the mistakes that we've done as Africans, where it has worked for New York Times. Let's replicate it for the Standard, for the Nation. I think that's the first mistake that we have to ensure that we don't make. In terms of models or what we can do, I think, I wasn't here yesterday, but today there are two keywords that have been mentioned by almost everyone. Partnerships, collaborations. That is one of the areas that we have to get into. There is no reason why NTV, for instance, can't work with a certain content creator like Lesen Jugush and see how do we create content that fits the Kenyan consumer and how do we monetize that content. The other thing that we have to do is localize content. Right now at Nation Media Group, we are experimenting with local ventures where we come to Nakuru and say we are going to set up specific content or platforms that focus on that particular area. Because a lot of people, what they're telling us is that you talk about a lot of issues that are very Nairobi based and you think the country is just Nairobi. And one of the things that has shown us that local content is something that can be a model that you can actually use as a media house is what we run on NTV, the county editions. Because that content is so localized, everyone in that locality wants to be involved. So you have businesses, you have the county government wanting to be involved and all that. And so you are able to ensure that you are creating new revenue streams for yourselves. The other one that people don't like hearing is that we have to make consumers pay for what they are consuming. The audience at one point has to pay for the content. I cannot spend money creating content and put it on YouTube for free. It's no longer sustainable. And then YouTube decides, let me give you 3 bob from the 10 bob that I have made. We have to get away from it. And so some of the things that we have to do is look at how do we create our own owned platforms so that we don't, the tech giants are not taking our food with a plate. That's what we have to think about.
If I could just jump on that quickly, I agree. The CPMs, cost per mil on YouTube and most social media that pays out is way too low for that to make online really sustainable at the moment. And I think, the question from the moderator is what can we do? And I think what we should do as well as media owners is that their power in numbers, right? So at the moment, someone gave me an example. I'm good friends with the founder of Mudundo. And Mudundo, for those guys who know, you download music for free, there's an ad embedded. But the CPMs are much lower than what it is in the US, for example. And he said when they were starting out, if we all remember Gafla used to sell a masthead on their website for 1 million shillings for a month. to Tusker. It can't do that anymore because of what came in with YouTube advertising and Facebook. But as an industry, we can get together and we can uplift the CPM so that they're sustainable. But we don't. Instead, we compete with each other. And the other thing is also to answer the moderator's question, is we need to take an ecosystem approach. Piracy is with us. It's taking 95 to 99% of the revenue out of the legal revenue stream. But we need to work together to basically reverse that, and it is possible.
Just to add to that, I think we also need to think very strategically, which is something that's not very easy to do, because 3-4 years ago, no one knew that COVID was on the horizon. No one would ever have imagined that something like this was going to happen. But it's very important for businesses and media organizations to think about what's going on in their environments and possibly try and predict, if an extinction level event was to occur, what would our response be? Another thing that I would also like all of us to keep in mind as content creators, journalists, and also consumers of the same content, is it possible to bring in value into the system? Deliver value for value. You're giving me content to consume. You're asking me to pay for it. But what's the quality? Is it something that I want to see? Is it something that I want to read?
All right. Adija, please go ahead.
So I think the point on CPMs and the inequality in the CPMs is something that we have to develop advocacy for. It is one of the simplest things that I think that we can get ecosystems to band together. I know in Indonesia, even the government has come, and representing local stakeholders and trying to get the attention of Google for this particular reason. And I think that in Africa we have to do this, and we have to do this in a coordinated fashion. Google knows that they have to do better. They know this. They're waiting for us to start knocking on their doors. But we have to start organizing ourselves, and I think this is really, really important. When you ask me about what is resilience, I think as much as we can think about resilience at an outlet level, we have to think about what does a resilient ecosystem look like, and a resilient ecosystem needs us to band together. It doesn't mean that we never have to compete with each other. Competition is healthy, but what we also need is collaboration. And that, I think, is often missing when it comes to efforts like this. And I think especially taking it to Google, asking for higher CPMs on YouTube is really, really important. And I think it's one of the simple things that we need to do, and we need to do louder. On top of that, I want to say there is no single business model that works right now. Let's just stop trying to use the New York Times and try to fit it in Kenya or try to fit it in South Africa. There is no single business model that works. The reason the New York Times is successful is because, first of all, it is the New York Times. They have a newsroom of 500 people, right? It is a very particular example existing in a very particular market. Most of us here in Africa, we're living in low and middle income countries. It means that most people have less disposable income. So yes, some reader revenue strategies will have to be assumed for some organizations, but I don't think reader revenue is going to be a successful strategy for everybody. We've just got to be very realistic. Even in the most developed markets, in a market like Norway, people are not taking out more than one subscription. That's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, right? So how do I, in South Africa, expect someone to pay a membership to the Daily Maverick, plus take out a subscription to the Mail and Guardian, plus take out a subscription to a podcast? We've got to be realistic as well about the number of people who can effectively do that. So I think we have to work on answers. I don't think that it's bleak. I don't think that we should sit here and just throw up our hands and say, okay, so it's done. I think that the fact that we're all here and we're passionate about media, I've just been thrilled to be here this week. Everyone has a passion for media, has a passion for trying to make this work. And we just got to continue trying different things. And it will happen, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Oh, great. I'd like to go a bit granular into the CPMs and the costs that are actually being paid for African content creators and Africans vis-a-vis other jurisdictions. Do you have any specific figures that any of you can actually share to actually bring the point home in the context of just how much less we are being paid in consideration to other people?
In the feasibility study for IFPIM, so if you go onto our website, ifpim.org, the feasibility study, which, I mean, I must preface, was published in February 2020, so those figures might be a little out of date. We used an example of a outlet, a YouTube outlet in Iraq, and what they were getting for CPMs compared to other markets. So that's one data point, but I don't know exactly what the figures are.
Mike, I'd like to ask you a question with regard to running a tech platform in Africa. What's the greatest challenge of running the tech platform in Kenya? A media tech platform.
I think it's like any startup, it's having the right level of finance to start and do have marketing and promotion. I think our first challenge when we started our journey in 2014. And no one knew how to do VOD in Kenya. And if you actually look at, and I may be corrected, but if you actually look at the other VOD platforms that are available in Kenya, is that they're not built in Kenya. Ours is the first and only to be built in Kenya, as far as I know. I may be corrected in a minute. But our engineers are brilliant, and we've spent 8 years since we started. And so that was the first thing, is finding the right talent to build the tech. I believe we've done that now. There's some really bright software developers, and we've just onboarded data science as well. So I think talent is covered. I think now it's really just the sort of financing you need to do the marketing. It's been a slow takeoff for us, but nevertheless we're growing, and we're growing organically as well. And we're about to have our first angel investor join us this quarter as well. So there is confidence in the marketplace, and that will take us to the next level. Yeah.
So how long has it taken you? You're saying you get your first angel investor now. How many years has it been?
8 years. Yeah, it's been long. I mean, it's not the only thing I do. Thankfully, I have another company, and that's what's funded this company. So. It's pros and cons of running two things versus being focused and having the money to take off. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to, before I get into the future and tech and AI, I'd like to throw a question to Oliver with regard to legacy media houses, and also with your background, with your work at NMG and background at Radio Africa as well. What's the reality on the ground, and why has it been so difficult for legacy media houses to leverage the digital space to help them become more sustainable and even possibly profitable?
First and foremost, the problem with me, I'm a very honest man. And I get into trouble for it so many times. But most media houses have refused to think. And the mindsets have refused to transform to fit where we are today. When I was working at Radio Africa, it took me about 3 years to be able to transform people's minds to see that more people are waking up and touching their phone first and not the newspaper. And that, for me, was where the future lied. And lies, in other words. And so, until the mindsets change, And we are still having the same problem today, even as I work for Nation Media Group, is that we still have a lot of us who are yet to switch. And instead, we are complaining influencers are taking our money. Yet, the content we are creating for linear products that where advertisers are not willing to spend. And so that's one of them. The other thing is that we, especially journalists, have refused to retrain and reskill themselves for the future. Unless you reskill yourself as a journalist, you cannot be able to do what needs to be done. Because the kind of content that people are looking for will not be done by pen and paper. There are so many other tools that you need to learn on how to use as a journalist for you to be able to move in that direction. The third thing that for me I feel has let us down is lack of investment in terms of human capital, in terms of technology, in terms of incubating innovation in media houses. Because today, some of the products that we have created today, even for at Nation Media Group, have been created by people inside that building, but with very little investment. And so, but we still continue to invest in that print newspaper where advertising has gone down by 80%, where the readership has gone down by half, 50%, but we still continue to invest in that so much without investing in where we are supposed to be headed. And so, lack of looking at the future is one of the things that ailing us. 5 years ago, no one in any media house would have wanted to listen to you talking about automation or AI. Today, all of them are asking, what can ChatGPT do for us? So we are not forward-looking and then expect that we are going to get solutions. There is no instant coffee in this day and age in terms of technology and in terms of how media and how audiences are behaving.
I'd also like to add to that I'll call it a lack of imagination, as well as a very deep and strong resistance to change. I find that we are very reactive in the region. We're not looking to see what's coming up, what's ahead of us, what's going on around us. And the nature of the ecosystem is that it's rapidly changing and we need to be adaptable. We can't sit back and say influencers are taking the money away, but they're providing valuable content. They're providing access to information that legacy media houses have been unable to do to some extent. It would be nice if, at some point in the future, digital and online platforms weren't treated as, like the forgotten lastborn or a fancy appendage. Keep your thinking at the forefront of your mind, thinking that this is my consumer, this is who they are, these are their daily habits. Understand your audience, understand their needs and their pain points, and speak to those pain points with the content that you're delivering.
So as we get into our second last theme of this conversation, which is basically about digital and AI intelligence, I'll ask for a presentation that I have to be showcased. Please click on this link, the one at the top, yes. I'd like to stand up for this if you'd allow me. If you just scroll to the top, please. I'm sure each and every one of us has interacted with ChatGPT in one way or another. Yes, if you haven't, hands up. No one? Okay, so this is ChatGPT, AI, artificial intelligence. And this is a thing that I generated about half an hour before our panel discussion. So the first question that I asked it is, how do you achieve media sustainability in a post-COVID world? And I'll just read through the points that it picked up really quickly. So it talked about diversify revenue streams, focus on digital transformation, embrace data journalism, collaborate with media outlets. You can keep scrolling down. Then a great number of points that it raised. And if you just keep scrolling down slowly, enough for people to be able to read exactly what it is that I was asking and the responses that I got from ChatGPT. Just keep going down, please. Expounding on digital transformation. Just keep scrolling now towards the bottom, towards the complete end. And these are all questions I'm asking around essentially transforming media and what the space of digital means. And I asked it questions about successful business models, talks about subscription-based, ad-supported models, membership-based, hybrid models, non-profit models. I'd just like to get to the absolute end, where I was asking about redundancy, essentially, and asking, what jobs will AI make redundant in the future with regard to media? And so we're talking about data entry, fact-checking, content creation potentially could be made redundant, video editing, and customer service. I'm sure my panelists haven't been able to fully read and check out the responses with regard to ChatGPT, but my question to you is, with this kind of potential that's possible now, this is something that I was able to generate literally 5 minutes before our presentation, and you could have done this on ChatGPT and avoided having to have come for our discussion, because that's literally everything we have talked about. So what then is the future for media considering AI and digital? This for anyone on the panel.
I think one of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, is that collaboration will become the future of the media, whether we like it or not. And it's actually easy for media houses to work with tech companies to use this technology and to actually even advance more technologies that can help in ensuring that we are doing our job in the right manner and in a way. Of course, AI will not replace the human touch in telling a story. But at the end of it all, it will make my work easier. It will cut off unnecessary clutter that is there in my story, for instance. And so, working with technology companies, working with education institutions is one of the ways that we can ensure that we work together and ensure that the industry becomes sustainable, in the sense that we are not running after technology, but we are working with it. Because what happens, what has been happening over the years is that even today, there are still journalists who don't know how to use social media for their work. I actually, when I'm doing my journalism training classes, I teach people how to use social media for journalism. It's actually at times shocking that people don't actually know how to do it. So instead of running after technology, we need to work with it. And the only way is collaborate with tech companies and collaborate with education institutions that are in that field.
So I think ChatGPT is very good at telling us about what happened before. So if I ask ChatGPT what happened in the last Kenyan election, it's going to give me a very rich, nuanced piece of work about what happened in the past. It can't tell me what is happening right now. It can't tell me what might happen in the future. That is still the job of journalists. So ChatGPT won't take away the job of journalists, but we have to think carefully about how we are responding better to what our audience needs. Because at the end of the day, the best journalism without an audience is like screaming into the void. Quality journalism without an audience is creative writing. And we're all headed down that path of just writing as an act of vanity, or producing video or audio as an act of vanity, if we're not actually keeping the audience in mind? What does the audience need? I'm fascinated that here in Kenya, to the extent to which journalists and media organizations feel like they're in competition with influencers. And I know some of the history about this. I know Asha from Debunk, has told me a little bit about some of the influencers and the kind of reach that they have. But at the end of the day, influencers are not journalists. Journalists are accountable to a set of standards that are public and that can be held accountable. Influencers are pay for play. We're not pay for play. And I think that just differentiating that is also really, really important if we have to think about how we are different. I think ultimately we are competing for attention. Attention spans are decreasing. It's a really, really noisy landscape out there. And we have to understand what is, ultimately, I think that what we're dealing with as well is what is the value of journalism? What is the value of public interest media? Why do we need it? We need it because it is a public good. We need it in the same way that we need water or air to breathe. Because without quality information, we cannot live. And that is ultimately what we are protecting. And ChatGPT will be able to provide some information, but it can't provide us information in the current moment. It can't tell us what people are thinking right now. It can't tell us what might happen in the future. And so I think adapting to audiences' different needs is really, really important. But I also find it striking that in Africa, and in South Africa, we're just as guilty of this. We're always talking, we're running about thinking about technology and trying the shiny new thing. Most people in Africa still access news through radio. Most people in Africa are young. How are we going to meet that need? And how are we going to create digital products that meet that need? That's exciting. And I don't think it's ChatGPT.
Yeah, I agree, and I think AI just needs to be looked at as a tool at the end of the day. We've already embraced it. We have a data engineer and a data scientist on board, and we intend to hire more. And it's our future. But the other thing I think we all need to remember is don't be fooled by the hype. Don't be fooled by the word open and OpenAI. It's still a commercial company. It's majority owned, shared. It's 49% owned by Microsoft. So I think we also need to, as media houses, just monitor. There's two things we need to be looking out for. What are the commercial models that are going to arise out of this new technology, and how do we harness it? And two, how is it going to be regulated as well? At the moment, it's not really regulated. It will be regulated like any new piece of technology at the end of the day. And we do know at the end of the day that it's business that influences a lot of the regulations as well. So we're a capitalist society. We just need to keep monitoring what this technology can do. Accept it. I think that's the other thing. I think if anyone tries to deny new tech, they're doing themselves a disservice. So, yeah.
Thanks for answering for me. Anyway, I do agree that AI is a wonderful tool. It's a wonderful opportunity that will encourage legacy media, digital media alike, to evolve with the times. It's something that's supposed to make your life and work easier. It's not the be-all and end-all. Like, journalists are not going anywhere. People who write, human beings are not going anywhere. At least, I'd like to believe we are not running the risk of going extinct anytime soon. So we do need human beings at the other end of this piece of tech. It can't exist in a vacuum. Someone has to learn how to use the tool in order to deliver value to the audience. Yeah.
All right, great. I'll get into our last theme for the day, which is essentially around policy and government. And my first question is very general, very direct to everybody. What are African governments not doing?
I don't personally, I don't like talking government and media in the same breath. I feel like media should operate in a vacuum where it's guided by journalistic principles, not necessarily government laws and policies. And I think one of the things that we have had in this country a lot is that in the past is that the government has used its own policies to control the media too much. The interference on media freedom, for instance, in Kenya, comes straight from the government advertising agency. Government has been the biggest revenue source for media houses in Kenya. And the government advertising agency was used as a tool where if you I said I'm an honest man, where I remember 2 years back, 2 CSAs, cabinet secretaries, were very annoyed about a story that the Star had done, and they called me with all manner of insults. I have those audio files somewhere. I was actually not even in the office. I had not even seen the newspaper. I was enjoying my holiday in Diani. But they decided to insult me and they told me that, we have a check that we're supposed to release to you for government advertising, but that check is not going to come because of the headline that you have today in your newspaper. You see that sort of intimidation. So for me, government should stay away from media business. It's as simple for me as that. The Constitution clearly states what the media should do, what it can do, what it cannot do. That is totally enough. We don't need the government to be used as a tool, or to use policies and laws as a tool to control the media.
So I'm going to say something a little different. I agree that government should not be involved in the running of media houses. I think that it's a problem the way government advertising is used as a tool, not just in Africa, it's in Latin America as well. It's basically a tool used by political parties and local governments, used to either support or punish media. And that's absolutely, we have to keep advocating for an end to that. It's an abuse of power. Right, I'm going to put that aside. I do believe, however, that we are nearing a time where governments have to seriously consider new taxation models on the tech companies that might be used to finance media. There are various conversations underway. The Australian model, for example, is one way where, direct payments to media houses from the tech companies is made. Another model is that, the tech companies have to be regulated, they have to be taxed, and that tax must be funneled to media, and government should be, because who else but government can be a receptacle of tax and be a distributor, or there has to be some kind of tax credits for media. All of these, in various permutations, are underway in South Africa right now. There are various conversations happening. Publishers banded together and they've put together a case before the Competition Commission against the tech companies. That process is ongoing and might take some years before it's resolved. There's another overture about whether, do we just go with the Australian model? Over the weekend, the South African National Editors Forum have released a new paper about the implementation of a national media fund, where basically pooling together a sum of money that will be used to support media, especially the most vulnerable media at this time. I encourage all of you to look at that. But I think an example of a government doing this well actually is the government of Sierra Leone, a much smaller country with a very troubled history at a very critical juncture in its own history, with an election coming up soon. But basically the government of Sierra Leone has brought together the entire ecosystem under a group called the Media Reform Coalition Group, something like that. And they too have put together the seeds for a national fund, where government will contribute cash to it as well, but it will be run independently of government. Government is giving its support. As IFPIM, we've given some seed funding for that. We'll continue to engage with that process. But I think that there are various things happening. But I think ignoring government altogether, or ignoring the power that governments might bring in the conversations that we have to have, would be silly. So this does require us to have better governments, yes. It means that we need to elect leaders who we can trust to have these conversations with. So hopefully we can get there. I remain an optimist.
I just want to pick up on the taxation thing. I think it was a really good point. And from a creative industry perspective in Kenya, our industry is taxed, okay? I'm sure a lot of you as creators, you'll see withholding tax. If you're streaming, you need to charge VAT to the consumer, for example. But that tax just goes to a central pot, and that's the treasury. And it only trickles back down to the creative industry through our new ministry, which is probably one of the underfunded ministries compared to the rest. And then there's the Sports, Arts and Social Development Fund, for which arts receives a very small percentage as well. And then we also don't know how that fund is managed. So I think there's a lot that can be done around, like you said, about channeling tax from the industry back into the industry. That doesn't happen from a Kenyan perspective. So I think that's one thing that could be our ask to government. The other thing, of course, is, and I'm going to say it again about piracy, Kenya has a very strong law, the best law on the continent on anti-piracy. It's a pioneering law. So from an African perspective, if other countries could adopt that law and adopt the framework that we're rolling out here, it's very simple. I'm sure we've traveled to countries where you can't access certain sites, yeah? You go to Ethiopia, go to Dubai, it's the same technology. At the end of the day, your ISP can just switch off access to particular sites, and those can be piracy sites. That's it. With a switch, it's done. You're converting those $2 million a day back into the industry, especially in economies that are highly digital, like Kenya. In other countries like Nigeria, that still has a physical distribution going on. That is a struggle, but they get their content also from online. So it's something that we can do to literally transform the industry. But it just needs government will, and government will only come when the industry comes together and mobilizes for it.
I'd like to disagree with Oliver to some extent. And I don't believe that government and media can exist separately and without influencing one another. I do agree that there is an undue heavy government presence that's detrimental to the growth and development of media. But doesn't that just present a better opportunity for media organizations, large and small, to figure out a framework for self-regulation, for governance that's within their purview and gives them just the opportunity to be a more robust business as compared to what was happening before?
Okay. My point is that we should not, is not that we should not involve government. My point is we should not allow government to get the upper hand we've given it. Because we started very well with self-regulation until we allow them to see everything that we are doing and allowed them inside to the extent now that they go and make laws targeting the media industry. Instead of, because all those laws were created so that they can deal with us. They're not created out of goodwill. It's not like we don't get involved with them. We have had task forces with, between media owners, media editors, and government. But still, government goes ahead and enacts laws and policies, and that's, for me, that's where the engagement, we have to disengage. For me, that's why we have to disengage and start looking at what are the best ways for us to deal with them.
Okay, thanks. We literally are on our last 2 minutes. I'm getting lots of hit messages here from the organizers to wrap up. So, but I have one last question I need to ask, and I'll give you literally 30 seconds to answer so that we can wrap this up. In the capitalist free market, such as ours, how do you compete with how do you figure out to grow media brands and compete with the exposure of better content, better quality content out there from better developing markets? And do you think that there is a case for controlling the economy a little bit more for the sake of the growth of the content industry, meaning that we would be depriving people for the rights of, let's say, the Premier League, so that we can grow the Kenya Premier League? And I literally am going to give each of you 30 seconds to finish this, because by 6:05, we need to be off this stage.
It's a tough question. It can take 30 seconds to answer, but I don't think that is ideal. It's the ideal route to take. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a very nuanced answer that question requires. But in a nutshell, what big international organizations can't do is tell you what's happening in your backyard, because you're simply not interesting enough to them. Local journalism will remain key, and the big organizations will be very good at telling you what's happening at a macro level, but you still need information about what's happening around you, what's happening in your city, and that's where local is key.
I'll take the 10 and 10 seconds that you saved. You're talking about protectionism, right? So what's interesting is, on a global perspective on trade, is that the economies who have had protectionism for centuries are now telling us to be in an open market, and that's not right at the end of the day. Protectionism does have a place. Local content quota does have a place. I understand news will be news, but our music industry in Kenya is under threat. Our comedy industry in Kenya is under threat. Our drama, our podcast, and everything. Everyone in this room is doing a great job, but we need to allow some time, and protectionism is not forever. 10, 15, 20 years to get off our feet and start running so that we can compete with the international quality that's out there. And once we do that, money will come in and quality will increase normally. Thank you.
So I believe that question needs a multifaceted answer. There's no one solution to fit what you've just asked. There's different aspects and issues that have undue influence into how content is consumed. There's different things that affect how content is produced. So we need to sit down and think deeply and strategically as to how to make our media organizations more robust and stronger.
Okay. I think then that concludes our panel and our panel discussion. So I'll have Njugush and back on the stage.